A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 85. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. How goes it, John?
It goes and goes, my man.
It goes, and it goes. And where it goes, nobody knows. And it keeps going even if you're not around. I have no idea what that even means.
What goes around comes around. I don't.
I should probably come up with some kind of like pithy quote at the beginning of every episode or something. Make it a little bit more pretentious or something like past is prologue,
Yeah.
Or something like
you could find some obscure Star Wars quote that hasn't been hammered into the ground.
Yeah,
for 20 years.
Kind of like one of the Clone Wars episodes. It's like, one of those hackneyed Yoda quotes or whatever.
Right.
When it's like, isn't that just probably George Lucas sitting around?
They had Chinese for lunch, and that was in their fortune cookie, and they just decided to put Qui-Gon Jinn's name after it instead of
exactly. It would just say, "Where's my Kung Pao chicken, Qui-Gon Jinn?"
Yeah.
But well.
So much Star Wars.
Yes,
I mean, we are in the kind of fallow period, but there are things to talk about.
Yeah, we've got. I mean, just to
always new product coming out with Star Wars.
Yeah, so we got a lot of little of this. We got some leaks. We got some speculation. Later on, I think we're gonna do some
rumors and innuendos. I think our favorite kind of show.
I think we're gonna do finally do our review of should I just read it as you put it in the notes? Our Thrawn review.
Oh, did I write Thrawn?
Yeah.
Oh,
Game of Thrones review.
That should be Thrawn.
I know. I'm just teasing. Our Thrawn review, and like I said, we got a lot of stuff. But first, do you want to just jump into this Blade Runner thing?
Yeah, let's talk about Blade Runner 2049.
That is.
I got a trailer. First, I got like a 12 or 11 second teaser, and then they got a full-on trailer for the new
full-blown trailer
sequel to the classic Star Wars movie that you and I haven't referenced it, I think, much recently, but there was a stretch where we referenced it like all the time on this show.
Well, yeah.
So you and I certainly have seen the movie a lot and think about the movie a lot.
Yeah.
So what then are your thoughts? What do you think about this new trailer?
Oh boy, it's hard to kind of put it in a kind of it's going to be this. I don't know. Let me try to. I wish I had a great way to just parse this, but you ever just like find out like a movie, like a great old movie, had a sequel that nobody remembers? Like, I'm trying to think of like okay, American Graffiti. Let's keep it germane to Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
So American Graffiti, I don't know what your feelings are about that movie, and I haven't watched it in a long time.
I like it fine.
But yeah, I mean, I grew up with that movie, loved it, not even besides the Star Wars thing. It's a great encapsulation, but a lot of people don't realize that about 2 or 3 years later, they made a sequel to American Graffiti, and it was called
American Graffiti.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't really have a great idea for the name, so they just tacked on another word. It was garbage. I mean, they basically had a lot of problems because Ron Howard was in it, but Richard Dreyfuss, who was kind of like pretty important to the original, declined to be in it, and so they had that problem. They had, Paul Le Mat came back, and anyway, long story short, it's a movie that even George Lucas kind of like rolls his eyes at. And I kind of feel like at the end of the day that in 20 years, people are going to look at Blade Runner and then they're going to go, yeah, they made 30 years later, they made a sequel to it. And they're like, really? Yeah, it's awful. And I hate to be a hater. Well, maybe I don't hate to be a hater, but I guess I just have to admit that I am a bit of a hater. And I realize that this has everything in it to be a big mistake,
Yeah.
Everything that was exciting about the original is now being recreated in a computer with really no context. I'm not what's his name again? Ryan Gosling. I'm not a fan of Ryan Gosling. I actually, to believe it or not, and I haven't. I really enjoyed the work he did with the Danish. I think he's Danish. Redfin or whatever his name is, the guy. Drive.
Refn.
Refn. He did another movie. I think it was filmed in Indonesia, which was called Only God Forgives or something, which is a very. So I mean, it's not like I've enjoyed him. He's really good in The Good Guys. So it's not a thing, but he is just completely in this trailer, and of course you're only seeing bits and pieces. But he looks like he's on the verge of falling asleep the entire trailer.
Yeah.
Even that Red Letter Media, who I've mentioned a few times, is a kind of a YouTube channel based out of Milwaukee. They did a parody of this yesterday with with CGI and stuff, where one of the guys that works on their show kind of steps in for Ryan Gosling as he's doing the audition for Blade Runner 2049, and it's like him just kind of holding his face dead as they pour water on his head, or it's like you're very upset, you just shot somebody, and it's the same expression. So it's kind of like, and I'm jumping around here, but I just can't really tell you how disappointed I am just in a trailer. I mean, let's get into some of your takes on this, because...
Well, yeah, I mean, I think... So I have not seen a lot of Ryan Gosling movies. I think when I see trailers for his movies, like when Drive came out and the Nice Guys, is that what it's called? That movie, yeah. I was like, oh, I might like to go see that, and then I just never do. So I haven't seen a lot of his work, but yeah, in this trailer, he just comes across as very bland. And just it could be anyone in that role, and with Ridley Scott in the original Blade Runner, obviously kind of the look of the film was the thing that everyone kind of remembered and talked about, and was the most influential part of it. And so, the look of this film, it's different, certainly. Everything's kind of, both because screen resolution, camera technology, etc., has evolved. Everything kind of looks sharper. And I don't know that is necessarily to the good, but I also don't know that they really had much choice, right? They're not going to make it look crappy and standard definition just for the sake of it, because I don't think that would have worked either. But I guess the big thing for me is Jared Leto, and I'm just like, come on.
Yeah.
This guy again, he keeps taking these roles. He keeps getting offered these roles that he clearly sees as a chance for him to act with a capital A. And it's basically just him chewing the scenery, but not in a fun way. And he's got something going on with his eyes, where I guess he's the person who, well, we don't know. At least in the trailer, it makes it seem like he's kind of the creator of these.
Yeah, he's like the Eldon Terrell of the
right. Except his personality and the way he talks and everything is more like Rutger Hauer's character, and right, Rutger Hauer's like personality and way of speaking and all of that in the original Blade Runner works if you are Rutger Hauer, but I don't think it works with Jared Leto at all. So I mean that was kind of the biggest thing that I took away, was just like, Jared Leto, are we going to do this again with him? You know, the movie itself, I guess I don't know if this is best or, I mean, worst case scenario is that it's awful, but I do wonder if this is just going to essentially end up being like the film version of Minority Report, which was like, yeah, it was fine, it was pretty good, but it's not something that's really endured that much. And you just kind of go through and you're like, yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good science fiction thriller. But, you know, then it, I guess at the time there were things it did that were kind of newish, Minority Report. But, you know, with this Blade Runner 2049, I'm also wondering, you know, how much is this going to look like all of the Marvel movies that are out now, in terms of, you know, the way things are shot and the kind of what the technology looks like, and how much is this going to look like other movies that are, you know, come out 2 weeks before and after this, and how distinctive is it really going to be? And I don't the sense that I got from the trailer was that it's probably not going to be as distinctive as the first movie was for its time, and that I think would probably be the biggest disappointment. More like, well, Jared Leto kind of sucked. I mean, that would contribute, but, you know, all the rest of it is kind of like, yeah, if it's not distinctive and it just kind of looks like a lot of other movies that are coming out these days, just in service of a slightly different story, then that I think would be the biggest disappointment for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's that thing where it's, you know, obviously if this is a syndrome that's happening now, is that everything that, you know, that golden, what did this movie come out? The original came out in 82, I guess. It's like kind of like that, you know, that everybody talks about 82 being that kind of that magical year for this kind of movie with, like, I think Wrath of Khan came out. And E.T.
John Carpenter's The Thing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like one of these things where it's all these like very singular kind of almost, in some ways, I know this is going to sound funny saying it like after I mention E.T., but a kind of almost a dark view of the future. And now we're way on. We're almost to the point where we're actually in the setting of where, you know, we're 2018, and then the first movie, I think, Blade Runner, is set in 2019. So it's like we're obviously not living in these huge, you know, 800-story apartments and flying cars and robots.
Well, I also wonder if it's just going to take place on a different planet, and that's why it looks different, right? Like we got a picture of what Earth looked like in that period, but the movie hinted at, like, oh, you know, a new future awaits in the off-world colonies. So is this thing going to take place on Earth, or is this going to take place on, you know, some asteroid somewhere or Jupiter or something?
I don't believe so. I have every indication that it's going to be Earth, and I guess the point is that, you know, when the film ends, when Blade Runner ends, and like, at least in my preferred viewing of it, well, even in the original theatrical version, that, you know, depending on which version you like, either the movie ends when the elevator door closes and we don't know what happens to Harrison Ford and Sean Young, or the version where they, you know, use the stock leftover footage from The Shining and they drive out in the woods in their spinner car, and it's like an optimistic future. It's neither one of those endings ever made me go, oh, I really want to know what happens after this. You know, take me into 30 years from now. I want to know. And, you know, bringing Harrison Ford back into this, and I honestly feel like it's a bit of a scam that he's not going to be as big of a part of it, because every shot I've ever seen of him, he's wearing that same, you know, t-shirt and jeans, which somebody had very deftly had kind of said, like, it screams this idea, like, you know, Mr. Ford, you know, your costume's ready. He's like, I'm going to wear what I came here in, you know, kind of like that idea where he's just, you know, and famously Harrison Ford and Ridley Scott did not get along during the production of this. Harrison Ford was very, you know, I don't think he got along with Sean Young. I think he was kind of, I don't know what if it was a personality issue or it was a quality of work issue or whatever. And it's so strange to think that, it took years to get him to even want to talk about that movie. I remember him on Larry King one time, but around the time that the director's cut had been making the art house runs, Joanna Cassidy would come out and talk about it. I think she was pretty much the only person who would come out, and she would go on Leno and promote this director's cut re-release. I mean, and Harrison Ford was on Larry King, and somebody brought it up, and he got kind of like, ugh, I hate talking about this movie. And he kind of shut the collar down in 5 seconds. And he goes, it's a detective story where nobody does any detecting, and I never liked it. Right. And it's like, for him to want to come back and revisit this, it's like, I've never heard, even in the Dangerous Days documentary that accompanies the Blu-ray DVD set of Blade Runner, it's like 3 hours for people, if you ever want to go down that rabbit hole. I don't think he even ever concedes that he enjoyed the film. I think it was a thing where, and for him to come back, it I don't know. It's that thing where it's like...
Yeah, I think we've talked about this in relation to Star Wars. But, he seems like he's at the point of his career where he's like, yeah, I'll kind of bookend some of these big roles I'm known for. Like, yeah, I'll do another Indiana Jones. Yeah, I'll be Han Solo one more time. Yeah, I'll be Rick Deckard one more time. So, these kind of... The heyday or the start of his heyday as an actor, they're kind of going back to that. And I think... whether it's because he, whether he's like, yeah, my career is kind of wrapping up these days. They want me to show up. It's probably not a ton of work for me. Yeah, I'll do it. Why not? Maybe he's mellowed, maybe he's softened, or because, he's worried that, well, I don't want them to, cast someone else as my character. I don't want them to, do like, well, what if we remake it, or if we do a prequel, or if we do a younger version, or if we only set it a couple years later and we get a younger actor to play Rick Deckard in 2022. And he's like, well, I don't want that. So if I sign on to this, then they have to make sure that I'm playing the same character and someone else isn't. There are several possible different explanations for this that range on a sliding scale or a continuum of more or less cynical, depending on how you're feeling that day. And maybe at a certain point he'll explain why, but I think it could be any number of reasons. But he does seem to be in this period where he's like, yeah, I'll be Indiana Jones one more time, I'll be Han Solo one more time, I'll be Rick Deckard one more time.
Yeah, you can always... Sorry.
That's fine, but yeah, to your point, I even just looking at the trailer, I hadn't picked up on the wardrobe component, but my assumption was like, okay, what's his name? Ryan Gosling character to find Harrison Ford, they have a conversation, and then like something happens, and that's kind of the extent of Harrison Ford's involvement in.
Yeah, you can
right?
almost
have a serious philosophical conversation that lets Harrison Ford like act and really dig into the scene and interact with this other character, but that's really all they're asking him to do.
Yeah, and you can almost see it in the trailer. It's like, I feel like I've seen enough of these trailers, and I know how people do trailers in the 90s. I mean, not the 90s. Oh my lord. 2017, and the fact that, and again, I was picking on millennials, and I don't mean to. I think everybody is almost like this in retrospect, is that we want it all in the trailer. So this thing is like, you can see that he, Gosling has to like step over a tripwire and to this building that we don't know, which initially I thought was not the Bradbury building, but whatever the building, the transit building in LA that they use for the police department. I don't think it is actually, or maybe, I don't know. Anyway, the point is that he shows, and then they show this thing like, they found me, and then there's an explosion and his car is there. And it's like, oh, he's literally been just living in this building for 30 years. And then Gosling's going to show up. And I feel like he's probably going to get killed off, and that'll be he's not going to, and I've already heard somebody say he doesn't show up until the last third of the movie anyway. So why are they, why are they showing him in the trailer? You know, it's like they could have easily, and like that thing is like, oh, I want to ask you some, what is it? He says something, why are you here? Something, I want to ask you some questions. And they're like, oh, what does that mean? It's like, well, of course, it's the Voight-Kampff test or whatever. I feel like, you know, in discussing this, it becomes very clear to me what I kind of think that the avenue that they should have taken, even if, okay, let's just accept that this is happening and you can't really, you know, it doesn't take away the original movie. I understand that. But it's like, if they really want to tap into the nostalgia, why didn't they just have it do like a trailer that it's Ryan Gosling doing whatever this movie's version of the Voight-Kampff test to a character, and then just kind of leave it like a nebulous, mysterious kind of thing. You know, I feel like they really overvalued the quality of the visuals we were going to see in the trailer. I mean, a lot of it is set up for nostalgia. It's like you see the Atari symbol, which, you know, there was this thing that they talked about, this growing curse of anything that like had advertised as being a futuristic thing that would exist in 2019 took a hit. So like Atari was in the original Blade Runner. Well, their stocks, they had the video game bust, and they went out of business. Coca-Cola, they were in the movie, and then that next year they introduced 2 years later they introduced new Coke, and their stocks hit the toilet. You know, it's like that kind of thing. And I think it's like JVC had a similar issue. Anyway, so now they're just showing these things, and it's become almost like, okay, well, now having Atari in there isn't so much a sign of like, well, this is what we think will be around in 30 years. It's more of like, oh, this is an alternate reality where Atari is still a going concern. And it's like, well, who cares? And I just feel like there was, you know, the heart of, you know, the movie itself was Philip K. Dick's original novel, which is obviously very different, deals with, you know, the concept of, you know, like a post-scarcity world or whatever, when really actually the only thing that's scarce is life, where it's like, well, we can fly, we can, you know, we can have robots, you know, sex with robots or whatever all the weird stuff that they had going on in that movie. We can send robots to mine planets for us, but the hardest thing to possess is, say, something like a real animal, like a sheep, you know, which was in a book because that's the name of the book. And then there was the concept of, you know, the internet is kind of in there, and in a religious, in Mercerism. And I understand that those things were never explored in the movie, and mainly because it was too complex. But I feel like now they've even gone over the slight, even though they got Hampton Fancher to come and write this.
Yeah.
That script itself was David Peoples came in, I think, was the other guy who came in, and they worked on it together, and Ridley worked in. So it was really a thing where the locus of the story had changed a lot. And I feel like and
honestly, I mean, David Peoples was brought in to write the scenes that Ridley Scott wanted him to write. You know, like they would have these meetings where, I mean, you know, not that David Peoples didn't contribute, and I think he did, you know, have a meaningful contribution, but you know, he tells this story in that Dangerous Days documentary or whatever you want to call it, you know, where they brought him in and they had him read the script that Hampton Fancher had written up to that point, and he, you know, in his words, he was like, this is great, I can't improve on this, I don't know what you want from me. And Ridley Scott and the producers basically laughed at him because who cares what the writer thinks? It's not
exactly.
It's in David Peoples' words, is like, it wasn't the writer who was going to make it better; it was Ridley who was going to make it better, right? So, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of that script is, you know, Ridley Scott sitting in a room being like, well, what if you have this like giant toy that comes walking in, or you know, these like tiny little mouse that is a wind up thing, and but it talks, and you know, so all of those kind of like crazy off the wall ideas, I think, or not all of them, but many of them came directly from Ridley Scott. So yeah, I don't know to what extent Hampton Fancher played a similar role here, where he kind of wrote up the outline and did a bunch of the early work, or if they brought him in as kind of the experienced person on the back end to like, well, no, really, it should be this versus that. It's probably more the former than the latter, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's, and I guess if I could distill this into like my one anxiety is that literally all we're going to be looking at is a 2-hour kind of love letter to the original film that is kind of like, well, I actually had this point. I should have written it down, but there is something about this that almost does kind of look like a fan film. Just the obviously we're looking at a 2-minute trailer, but it looks like that thing where how they there's that thing that I forget what it's called. Paramount Pictures just sued them about it, but they're Star Trek continuations of the original series, of the original, like the Shatner series. And one of the things about that is that they go and they cast a bunch of and I'm confusing a lot of different projects, so I apologize. But there is this phenomenon of people that spend like their whole life savings to make episodes of Star Trek, the original series. And it's gotten to the point where they can literally go and say, hey, for $20,000, we can hire Walter Koenig for 3 days. And they do. Right. And they'll have, but sometimes it'll be a situation where obviously Walter Koenig it wouldn't make sense for him to play Chekhov. So they have him play a different character or something. Or sometimes they do hire the actors, and it almost feels like this is like a thing where they made a fan film and somebody said, hey, we can get Harrison Ford for 3 days. Let's get him, and we'll put a nice thing. And basically all we're going to do is we're going to sit and watch this movie. It's going to be, the music is going to be a slight knockoff of Vangelis. It's going to be, they're going to try to do these beautifully expansive shots of Los Angeles in 2049. But the problem is we already know that it's Los Angeles isn't going to look like that in 2 years. So we know pretty much they've already, it's like, well, it's definitely not going to look like this in 30 years. I mean, I feel like the whole, like the future is now kind of aspect to the movie, which is only a small aspect. It wasn't really a movie that's, except for the long shots of special effects and the music. So I guess they do luxuriate, as the overused term, in the visuals a lot. But I also we talk about Ridley Scott, but this is not a Ridley Scott directed movie. It's Denis Villeneuve. And I've said a few times that I really enjoyed his movie Sicario, which has Benicio del Toro and Emily Blunt and Josh Brolin. He made Arrival, which was just out. Yeah, and I would say that I really didn't enjoy Arrival. I honestly felt it was a pretty damn lazy film. And I don't know. I think I already mentioned this on the show that I almost said there's something really familiar about this movie, and that what I did, and I went and grabbed in my collection because I'm a compulsive cheap DVD buyer. I was like, I still had a copy of the Keanu Reeves remake of the Day the Earth Stood Still. Like they stole, I'm not making an accusation, but I'm saying it felt like they stole part and parcel aspects of that movie,
heavily influenced by.
Yeah, it was like, well, that's really strange. You're being influenced by a flop movie. It's like, there's a twist to that movie that I didn't really think was that great.
To Arrival.
Yeah, there's a twist to it, and it's just like.
I mean, that's so. How much of that, because it's based on a short story.
Okay.
So how much of what you didn't like about that movie had to do with kind of the plot elements of it, and how much of it was the look of it and the direction of it?
Well, that's a fair question, and I would say my problem was the plot. I mean, the visuals, again, like Sicario, any of the problems I had with that were the story. It was never the visuals. But yeah, the visuals are. It seems like this guy's got his visuals down. Although it's like I question some of the plotting, but I mean, that's the question that we have about Ridley Scott. We were talking before we recorded. I mentioned that I might be going on a trip, and I'm like, oh, if I get bored, we might go see the new Alien Covenant. And you had kind of said, really, you're going to go see that? And it's like, yeah, I kind of understand what you're saying. And then a person a friend of the show, I was talking about it with him, and he was like, yeah, I'm not going to go see that. It looks terrible. And it's just like, yeah, I mean, it's like, has Ridley kind of, if Ridley's kind of lost the magic a little bit, like he just keeps going back to the well. I mean, if you listen to him, it's like, I'm gonna do like 8 of these movies, and it's gonna, it's basically one ship's gonna be leaving as the Nostromo shows up in the timeline of Alien. It's gonna be like, oh, you see that little glint of light, and that's supposed to be the ship leaving from the, my 8th prequel to Alien, and you're like, right. I mean, obviously, we're steeped in this kind of world right now because we talk about Star Wars, and all it is it's like that constant battle between, somebody wanting to show you something new and people wanting something old. And I don't necessarily feel like these movies should be beholden to that. I think I'd rather be, challenged. But I know it's only a trailer, but I just can't. Nothing in the visuals really makes me feel like this is going to be anything that Blade Runner 2049. Right down to the fact that the title is so bad. Yeah, it just that's the best they could come up with.
It's very generic.
I don't even think calling it Blade Runner 2 would have been more problematic, because it also reminds me they did K.W. Jader, who was actually a contemporary of Philip K. Dick, actually did 2 sequels to Blade Runner in book form that are really bad, but it's because the story itself there's not a lot to build on, and like literally it was like the only thing I remember about the first book was that Bob Holden, who is the guy who gets shot by Leon in the first scene of Blade Runner, is walking around with a briefcase that is actually his lungs. It's like this thing where it's like he's got hoses coming out of him because he's been so busted up. And then like the second sequel is Rick Deckard is like a consultant on a movie being made of his life. And it's like this thing where basically, and also in the first sequel, he keeps running into new versions of like Roy Batty and Leon, and it's just like, oh boy. And I thought like that. Well, you can't get any worse than that. And I think they might be attempting that. And also there was a Total Recall TV show called Total Recall, like a
TV show
23. It had nothing to do with the Philip K. Dick thing, but it actually had a plot very similar to what's that Carl Urban, J.J. Abrams executive produced thing called Almost Human that was on a few years ago. It was like this thing where it was like, hard-boiled cop with partnering up with a robot, It was very similar to that, but it was called Total Recall like 2035 or something like that.
Yeah, so to the point you just made a minute ago, something just crossed the Twitter threshold.
Uh-oh.
Ridley Scott has mentioned he could potentially make 2 more sequels to Alien: Covenant.
Yeah.
He so yeah, we could keep going with those, I guess. But there was something to circle back to something you talked about at the very beginning. I want to go back to more American Graffiti because this does tie into Star Wars. And it's not really related to our conversation.
That's
a little bit, but not as much. But it's just, I think it's a funny story about George Lucas. So this was in one of the little like webisodes about making the prequels, the Star Wars prequels, and it's with so this is like mid to late 90s. So George Lucas is talking to Frank Oz, right? Frank Oz is there doing the Yoda, and they're figuring out like, okay, what the Yoda puppet, and what the scene, how he's going to play the scene as the puppet, and so then then it cuts to them just like shooting the shit sorry, between takes or whatever, and Titanic has just hit big, I guess. And so Frank Oz is like, oh, can you believe this Titanic thing? And George Lucas is like, yeah, it's just you can never predict, what's going to take off and what's not going to take off. He brought up More American Graffiti and how like no one, American Graffiti was, had some success, and then no one wouldn't, and then More American Graffiti lost a ton of money. He was like, so you just never know with these things. You can't predict it. A More American Graffiti, he was like, oh, you can't predict when a movie's not going to do well. I mean, look what happened to More American Graffiti. So I don't know if they, directors or actors or whomever is working on these things, like if that's really how they think about it, where they're just like, oh, I'll say yes to this, or I'll choose the roles I take, but with an eye towards like, yeah, maybe this will become a hit, who knows? Or they have different goals when they take different projects. Or like, oh, well, I always wanted to do a sci-fi epic, so that's why I agreed to act in this movie. Whereas, oh, I always wanted to work with this director, so I just said yes to whatever the next project he had going on, right? So I think maybe with directors or the producers or the people kind of at the helm of these things, it's just, they try to make the best movie they can and then kind of release it in the world and hope for the best. And so, with these Alien movies, or with Blade Runner 2049, or with other similar kinds of things, are like, well, people seem to go see these movies. These kinds of movies seem to be making a ton of money. Marvel's making a ton of money, and Star Wars has gotten back into the game now. So, let's throw our franchise back out there. People are spending money on this kind of stuff, and so maybe we can make some money making this thing that we have fond memories of, because that was 30 years ago, and we don't actually remember what it was like day to day.
Yeah.
So I think there's a certain amount of both amnesia with rebooting or resurrecting these franchises, but then I think there's also an element of, yeah, we'll see what happens. Forecasting or kind of wishful thinking, like, yeah, we'll see. Who knows what becomes a flop and what becomes a hit. So we'll just do whatever seems like it is making money at the time.
Yeah, and it's funny because you think about like the early interviews of like George Lucas and the way he talked about what had inspired him to follow the path of the career that he had, mainly when he tried to start a company with Francis Ford Coppola, and that didn't go well. But the thing is that he had said, like, well, by the time I came up in the 60s, the studio system had essentially died. I mean, that was the generation. It was like he was on the cusp of the end of that kind of things, because of there had been like financial changes and whatnot. Even Harrison Ford had been subjected to that on a point. I think early in his career, he had signed on as a studio player, and that's how he showed up in, like, what is it, Death Rides the Carousel or whatever it was, whatever that movie he has like
right.
2 lines in. And he had gotten out of it and decided, I'm going to go do carpentry or whatever, because you realized it's a dying system. So, Lucas creates Lucasfilm, has this huge hit, completely changes an aspect of how movies doing. And I think he was like, oh, I want to do this so I can create my own movies and have my own vision. But by doing that, he completely screwed movies in a way, because now everything is like, yes, I want to make movies my own vision. Like, and everybody goes, yeah, let's all make movies of this vision. And this vision is the original. We're trying to encapsulate the original Star Wars, and not in storytelling, but in the idea of a modestly budgeted movie that reuses a lot of tropes in a kind of a new and exciting way. Mm-hmm. And then we have this huge hit. But I feel like every year they go, well, okay, well, we're not gonna come up with original concepts. We're just gonna redo our concepts. One of the things that people had kind of lamented about when Rian Johnson had signed on for episode 8 was, and I'm thinking of mainly thinking of like the Slash Filmcast, which was a movie podcast I used to listen to. I haven't checked in a long time, but they had lamented the fact that Rian Johnson, he had such an interesting stylistic way of, and again, I've said this before, he's not actually a young director. He's in his 40s.
Right.
It's like he's been around, but he has a unique vision. He's making movies like Brick and even Looper, which is it's a good movie. It's got a lot of interesting stuff in it. It's not it's not like reinventing the wheel, but it's an interesting time travel movie. And of course, he signs on to Star Wars. And even I don't really know Colin Trevorrow's thing. I've made fun of him a lot, and I feel bad about that, because it's like I'm really not. I was more of I'm not so much not a fan of his as I wasn't a fan of the Jurassic Park movie. But I mean, he's a guy that, safety not guaranteed. He had some interesting concepts. It looks like he looks like he might have had some stuff like, I don't know if you're particularly familiar with the Mark Duplass's career, his kind of philosophy about making stuff very cheaply and making high quality stories, but with modest budgets, and kind of living off of direct to video kind of concepts. Now, you can't obviously make you can't make Blade Runner 2049 on a Mark Duplass budget. So I think it was thought that Trevorrow was going to maybe follow in that, and maybe that Rian Johnson was going to be making some interesting stuff, and then it's like this Dennis I can't pronounce his name. I'm sorry. Villeneuve. He was on this track to make these kind of interesting movies. I haven't seen Prisoners yet, but I've heard that that's very good too. And now they're all getting sucked up by these franchises to kind of make their version of this thing that we all loved 30, 40 years ago. And it's almost like, for people like me, they're very picky. We're probably never going to be satisfied. But then generally it's like if they get 75% of the way there with the visuals and the references to the other things, like most people will be happy with it. It's like maybe movies are just not as important to people as they were 30 years ago, and I'm not trying to make a value judgment. There's a lot of things. I mean, you could sit here and make an argument that there's video games out there that are ultimately more interesting than movies that have come out in the last 20 years. So it's that kind of thing. But for a person like me that's grown up in these films, just to, if someone had told me in college, like, oh, they're making a sequel to Blade Runner, I think I would have been over the moon. But now I've become so skeptical about, like, I enjoyed the Tron movie, that the second Tron film, but mainly because part of it, not because the story was so great, because even the original Tron isn't that great of a story, but the fact that they would go back and revisit something. This is obviously pre Disney buying Star Wars, so never in my wildest dreams would I think that they were going to do sequels with the original cast. And so having Jeff Bridges coming out and like going like, oh, here's that movie that we made 30 plus years ago that was considered a flop, and it's like, we're going to do a sequel and we're going to take it seriously. So I mean, it can work, although it didn't make enough money for them they canceled the third one, which maybe that's a good thing. I don't know, but it just helped. I just can't help but think that these are just like, it's kind of like a cash grab kind of situation where they're just like, oh, if we get 75% of the way there, we'll be all right. It's not going to be like, there's not going to be a Dangerous Days for Blade Runner 2049. There's not going to be a, if I'm a big fan of the Alien franchise, at least the first 3 films I think are pretty good. And there's some great documentaries very much akin to this Dangerous Days things about them and their histories. And there's something about the fact that these, movies are a craft from the ground up, because they had to build sets, and you know what I mean? They had to make technologies to solve the problem. So they would inform the story in some ways. And now that we can just do everything in computers, and you know, we can even de-age people. You know, we can even like, I watch movies and I'm like, you know, watch that 4th or 5th or 6th, I don't remember what number, the Terminator movie that came out with.
Right.
And it's like, you look at it,
5 or 6.
And I was looking at it going like, well, Arnold looks pretty good. And then I realized, yeah, he looks good because they ran his face through a computer. Every shot you see of Arnold is run through a computer. And so
he's
now,
been the digital equivalent of airbrushed into oblivion, basically.
Yeah, and it's like that thing where they're going to keep doing this. It's like there's it's almost like when you have no restrictions, it's like the art doesn't turn out very good. Like I've always said that the reason that A New Hope or Star Wars is the best Star Wars movie is because it was done, that everything was plotting against that film for it not to come out, that it was going to be it was going to get released in the late fall on CBS or something. It was going to be like a staple of TV movies or something. But against all the odds, it came out to be this incredible thing. But, you know, I don't know what my point is, but it's just like...
well, so that's a good, maybe a good point to pivot to Star Wars.
Let's pivot to Star Wars.
Well, so let's talk about both Colin Trevorrow and this idea of kind of digitally de-aging someone. So, you know, the saga of Episode 9 and what they're going to do after Carrie Fisher's death. We've covered, I mean, every possible iteration of this story has been mentioned, right? So at first they were saying, well, we're not, you know, they were thinking about, you know, doing something similar to what they did in Rogue One, and a lot of this was probably outside speculation where people thought, oh, well, they managed to make a digitally recreated young Carrie Fisher for Rogue One. Maybe they can just do the same thing for present day Carrie Fisher in Episode 9. And then they said, no, we're not going to do that. And then they said, well, maybe, you know, we will reuse footage that, you know, was shot for Episode 8. We'll just repurpose it for Episode 9. And then they said, no, we're not doing that. So now, I mean, the story is from Kathleen Kennedy is they basically had to start over from scratch. And you and I have talked about this enough that I don't think we're going to cover a ton of new ground, but just this idea that, you know, obviously they were at least in pre-production, you know, at the same time that Episode 8 was being made. And so Episode 8 was not made with, you know, probably not made with Princess Leia's or General Leia's death in mind. Maybe it was, but, you know, maybe they had other plans. Who knows? But yeah, they basically had to start from scratch and had to start all over. I assume they mean story-wise and not necessarily like design-wise, but, you know, one might influence the other. But they had to start over story-wise after Carrie Fisher's death with Episode 9. And so, you know, I think that was probably Kathleen. I mean, she was asked about it. And so I think she was just answering the question, but I don't think she was trying to be strategic in choosing her words. But I mean, it is a signal that, yeah, no, we're not going to get Carrie Fisher in this movie. They will have to deal with Carrie Fisher's, you know, General Leia's death in some form or fashion. Maybe Episode 8 in post-production is able to put that death into this movie that's coming out, but otherwise this is going to be a death that happens off screen that they have to like talk about, say, oh, that there's this attack happened and we're all sad about it without the audience seeing it happen. So that's kind of where we are with that. I had something else, but I forgot what it is, so I'll let you jump in here.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is the kind of thing you can't really, it's kind of critic proof or criticize. I can't really criticize it because it's like, what do you do? Yeah. What do you do when you lose somebody? It's like, you know, she's so iconic and, you know, I could speculate to say that probably nobody is more annoyed about this than would be Carrie Fisher if she could be annoyed by this. 'Cause I think that she actually, her initial trepidation about revisiting this role, I think, went away, and I think there was a lot of. I think she was pretty honest that she had a lot of anxiety when she first came to do her stuff, and for The Force Awakens, they had to redo it, some shots or whatever. And I think that probably she probably was in her groove on 8. I assume she was back in the mix. I mean, she was back acting as she was doing like Catastrophe and over in England. And yeah, it's just, this is the kind of thing where it's like, you knew eventually it was going to happen. Like we were going to lose somebody. It's just, she wasn't the one I thought we were going to lose, though. I honestly thought it was going to be like John Williams. I thought he was going to pass away, and then we were going to have to deal with, and the truth is, we've already kind of dealt with the idea of a Star Wars movie without John Williams, and, our opinions are different on that. I was more of a fan of it than John was, but, that was we've gotten a taste of how we're going to deal with it. To me, this is kind of like, I've sat around and thought about, because I don't know the plot of Episode 8. It's like, but yeah, how many different ways could you do they show a ship? Do they have to concede and show an image, a CGI image of her standing on the deck of a ship, and then it explodes, and it's like that kind of thing. I don't, I doff my cap, and that's kind of why I kind of walk back, kind of picking on Colin Trevorrow, because I just can't imagine how frustrating this is going to be to have to deal with. It's like, if you have to do a page one rewrite of something, and I don't think there's any way that they're going to be able to satisfy people. You know what I mean? And I'm not trying to be negative about it. I just think that it's one of those things where she was so beloved. She was such an important part. It was so exciting. And then coupled with the idea that, Harrison Ford is, obviously stepped away, his character is done. And so we're at the point where we're, it's the atrophy of like, well, we've lost Kenny Baker, the legacy characters, even Mark kind of will concede that like, well, we're not really the focus anymore. And everything is that kind of like, it's like, what do they call it? The slow goodbye of that kind of, and I honestly felt like this trilogy was going to be more of a last hurrah. You know what I mean? And now I'm starting to get that kind of like, oh boy. And again, I took the trailer again. It's a trailer. I don't know why I do this, but I really took the episode. Well, it was a teaser even of Episode 8 to task, because I wasn't getting the feels out of it. I don't really know how valid these criticisms are anyway, because it's like, it is a teaser, and it's, again, like you have said many times, it might not even have been Rian Johnson's doing. It might have been like the marketing department of Lucasfilm with a box full of footage throwing something together. So I'm really curious. I'm actually almost more curious about this now than I am of Episode 8, because I feel like the way movies are plotted out now, that everything is well, initially it was like everything's a trilogy, everything's the first part of a trilogy, and that now these movies are made with the foregone knowledge that they're going to be able to, anything we don't tie up here, we'll just throw it onto the third part of the trilogy. And I worry how much of that has been done here, because it's like, I don't know. I mean, it's such a I don't know what we're going to get with 8. So it just makes me, it's like, and I kind of hope that they're able to, that was one of the big problems with the Revenge of the Sith, is that I felt like George had left too much stuff that needed to happen to that third movie, which it made it a lot of like transitions, and a lot of like, Anakin's fall happened way too fast for my satisfaction, like narratively. Right. But then again, it's like, it's a Star Wars movie, and it's a lot of shorthand. So I would hate to, and even Jedi had that problem. It was a lot of things, like, we got to get Han, we've got to have a final battle, we've got to resolve the Luke thing, we've got to resolve the other thing, because everybody knows, if you read the books, George didn't know there is another, the Yoda thing. He didn't know until into production, I think, of Jedi. I mean, they were way into production before they decided that Leia was going to be Luke's sister. And I just worry that this is kind of where we're headed to. We're headed that third movie, which it has this insurmountable thing like, what do we do with an iconic character that goes before their time? And it's like it's coming out in May of 2019. It's got 6 months less to work, but they must be confident. They must be, because otherwise they could easily, nobody even bat an eye if they said, yeah, it's coming out in December. We're thinking about doing it, but this has obviously, changed our view, and we're just going to give it extra 6 months to get it right. It's like, no, they're totally committed to doing this, having a year and a half window between episode 8 and 9. So they must have something figured out, even at this point, because
yeah,
it might have. Sorry, go ahead.
Possibly. There was another piece of this too, to something you were saying earlier about Carrie Fisher's attitudes towards doing these movies, and this ties into kind of the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is, in the trailer you see kind of her from behind, but we're seeing a few more kind of on-set photos of her and her costume or wardrobe for this movie, and people are noting it looks pretty good, and people are saying her performance is very good, and certainly she has a larger role in this movie, and that she looks a little more royal. She looks a little more like royalty in this in episode 8 than she did in episode 7, and I can't remember where it was. Someone referred to her in episode 7 as basically the air traffic controller in chief of the Resistance, right? Where we're told that she's in charge, but she doesn't have a huge role that kind of demonstrates that. And in episode 8, it seems like we'll get maybe a little more substance to that, and her performance may match that. And I mean, I just wonder if and especially because, well, not especially because, sorry, I have two different thoughts competing in my mind.
Trust me, that's the theme of my day right now.
Stooges all trying to get through the door at once. So there are two things. One is that, I think some of the issues you raise about, well, we'll just push everything off to the third one of the trilogy. I really don't know that this fact that Rian Johnson was initially, involved in writing episode 9 and now he's not, or maybe his involvement was never as much as they said it was, but they certainly announced that he was writing both movies at one point in time. But now he's not. And so, how much of that continuity are we going to get, and how much of that did they just kind of push it off to Colin Trevorrow and the writer of Monster Trucks and say, here are all the different narrative threads, wrap them up, and how much of episode 9 are they going to try to, how much are they kind of dealt a bad hand where they can't really create anything new. They can't add too many new story elements themselves. They don't get much of a chance to kind of say, well, this is what we want it to be, because by that point, there's an arc to everything, and you have this story group that is kind of making sure that there's this consistency. So, episode 9, it's going to wrap up, and we may, by the time we see episode 8, some of episode 9 may still be a surprise to us, but we know we're going to get a scene where they wrap up this narrative thread, and we know that Rey's story is going to, have to wrap up, and we know that Finn's story is going to have to wrap up, all of those things. So the fact that they've had this kind of juggling with the writers and the people in charge of episode 9, I don't know whether that speaks to what you're talking about or not. But the other piece of this is that Rian Johnson got J.J. Abrams et al. To change the ending of The Force Awakens, sort of, which is that originally, I'll back up. So if you'll recall, at the end of The Force Awakens, Rey, they learn where Luke Skywalker is, Rey, and I guess Chewie. I think I can't remember if he goes with her.
Yes, he does. He's co-piloting.
right. Takes off. That's right. Takes off in the Millennium Falcon, goes to the secret hideaway planet where Luke Skywalker is, and brings R2-D2 with her. That's how it is in The Force Awakens. Originally, in the original script, or maybe even it's not clear which iteration of the script this was in, but I gather it was pretty late in the process. BB-8 was supposed to accompany Rey to this secret island planet. And then Rian Johnson said, hey, for what I'm doing, because I'm picking up right after this, it would help me out a lot if you made it R2-D2 instead of BB-8. And they said, sure, it's, we can digitally change it or, whatever they had to do. And so that's why it's R2-D2 in the final version. But I mean, doesn't it make much more sense story-wise for it to be R2-D2 anyway? Because, right, that's Luke's droid. There's no reason for BB-8 to be there other than accompanying Rey. But, for this, R2-D2 is the one who, put all the code together and figured out where Luke was. It would just make so much more sense for R2-D2 to be there. And so this is, it seems almost like this is the issue of how in the movie this was not changed, how in the movie when they show up, come back from Starkiller Base, Leia hugs Rey instead of hugging Chewie after Han's death, right?
Right.
And everyone's like, well, why doesn't she hug Chewbacca? And everyone involved is like, yeah, she probably should have hugged Chewbacca instead of Rey. So this kind of, so having that in addition to this R2-D2 versus BB-8, I just wonder about the level of attention to detail on a story level that was going on. And, people who are not huge fans of J.J. Abrams, might say well, maybe that's a consistency. Maybe that's a consistent pattern with him in, the Star Trek movies and whatever else that the story wise, let's wrap everything up in a neat package. Here are all of the different, not just the big story beats, but what happens in the individual scenes, that attention to detail just isn't there. But, the fact that, so all of that was going on, good for Rian Johnson for suggesting it. But again, to get back to that earlier point, I just wonder how much of that's going to get pushed off to episode 9, this issue that you raise, and that, how much of a hash episode 9 is going to be, or not even a hash, but just, Colin Trevorrow, and I can't remember his name. I'm just going to keep referring to him as the writer of Monster Trucks for joke purposes. But, how much kind of new stuff and how much of their own stuff are they going to be able to put in there? Or are they just going to be busy tying up Rian Johnson's loose ends, which he, inherited from J.J. Abrams? I don't know, but just, by the time you get to the third part of the trilogy, things get a little looser, and there's this attitude of we just kind of need to wrap this up, and whatever details that matters less than kind of the big arc, and we're putting a bow on everything and just focus on that. Yeah. That was a lot to talk
No, it's it's a good, it's that thing where it's where they go, well, if they all of a sudden, if they get this idea that they think, well, if it's not perfect, it's all right, because we got a Han Solo movie and we've got spin-offs and we've got a TV show where it's all of a sudden it feels like the burden is actually inside. You could make the argument that the burden seems almost less, because they're maybe, and again, I'm sure that they would deny this, and maybe this is wrong to say, but maybe they feel maybe it's well, maybe we don't have to have it. Maybe it doesn't have to be perfect. We've got so much content coming out here. If we don't knock it out of the park, it's fine. You know what I mean? It's well, we have to compromise. It's we had issues, or we'll
fix it in episode 9, or we'll fix it in episode 10 or whatever.
Well, but that's the thing. They're already kind of intimating heavily that this is going to be the end of any kind of a saga. That it doesn't make sense, maybe on a creative or a financial sense. It doesn't make sense to commit to we have to have 3 movies and we have to sign casts for 3 pictures and we have to pay all this stuff and we have to set up, we have to get the, writer producers for 3 films, rather than with these standalones, they can hire a whole new cast, and like, well, they can maybe reuse some of the costumes, or it's like it's less stress. It's like, and it becomes, as more of them get made, it almost feels like, oh, there's less inherent pressure to get it right. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's, and what is right, because then they'll start to question, like, well, you say that, but you're just like living in the past. Like, these movies have to move forward. It's a different thing. It's that kind of idea where, like, you can't just expect us to adhere to, something that happened in 1980, like the way of doing a movie 37 years ago. We have to grow. And that's like their excuse for, like, oh, we kind of missed some of the details,
Mm-hmm.
It's, and you can see a little bit of that in Rogue One, where it's all of a sudden, it's like the Death Star is the concept of a Death Star has been completely, like, dulled. Or, like the edges, the menace of, Vader is like, Vader is just a character in Rogue One now, Tarkin is Rogue. The whole thing about these things, they were supposed to be spin-offs. They weren't supposed to be part of the saga. It's like, it's the story before the story kind of thing. I thought it was more like a kind of thing like, oh, it takes place in the universe, but, but when they finally made the movie, they had to throw, at the last minute, they had to throw in a Vader thing. A lot of this movie is that they made a CGI Tarkin because they, not only did they want to see if they could do it, but they also probably wanted to take some of the gravitas from Episode 4 and be like, oh, you can't have, a Star Wars movie with a Death Star and not have Tarkin. And I'm like, yeah, you can. It's like, it could have been Krennic. The entire movie could have been just Krennic. And, Vader and Tarkin could have shown up at the last minute and said, like, oh, where's Krennic? Oh, he died. Okay, well, we're taking control. It didn't need it, but it feels like even now the spin-off movies are having to dip into the original trilogy to kind of buttress the importance of their story. So it's that kind of thing where it's like they want to say they want to move away from that, but they're constantly, using those movies as a framework. Even so, and I don't want to jump ahead, but oh no, it wasn't. This isn't on notes, but I was reading a brief on Twitter on one of these news sites that had said that it's heavily intimated that this Buenaventura or whatever that they're filming the Han Solo movie is actually a stand-in for Tatooine.
Ah.
And that's why
a different part of Tatooine.
Well, yeah, I did a very cursory search that there is some question right now about the viability of Tunisia as a filming location right now, and since they're not even going to be they wouldn't be using the homestead. But there's been some unrest in that country, and like some like the foreign minister or something says, oh, tourists should come, and then another one says no, tourists shouldn't come. So it's probably not a viable place to film right now. So it does make sense that, like, oh, well, maybe they're filming this Tatooine. This isn't Corellia. So it's, again, they're still dipping into the original, that pot of ideas, because they haven't really been able to kind of crack the code how to expand this universe without tying it into the original films. So for them to think that those sequel, it'd be all right to be like, oh, if we get most of the way there, it won't matter because it's the end. It's like, I don't agree, because these movies, even the prequels, as much as people have, reviled them, it's like they still inform even the spin-offs. I mean, the clone trooper tank and the brief shot on Wobani prison camp. I mean, they still had to, like, dip back into the Clone Wars. So it's a thing where it's like, I feel like these numbered movies are very important to set tones. Otherwise, you're not going to have good spin-off movies. So it's like there could be no slacking. no slacking is allowed on these movies, and I really hope that a lot of this is just, anxiety about how are they going to deal with this problem, because I honestly feel it's like, like you said, it doesn't make sense. Why would BB-8 be on Octo? And these kind of like little things, and even the Chewie hug thing, I have to admit that was like, it really felt like an oversight. It was like a mistake. And I know that they tried to retcon it and stuff, like, but I think JJ said, it was probably just a mistake. But it's like, wow. Yeah. It's like, really? Right. You're making that kind. I can understand and be like, oh, John Boyega is not wearing his boots in this one shot or something. And I can understand mistakes like that.
I mean, considering how many, story meetings and how many times they've looked at the script, I mean, I think that, whoever wrote that scene, whether it was Abrams or Lawrence Kasdan, or, whether they passed drafts back and forth, and so they both took a look at it, right? You have to think, okay, so, we come back from Starkiller Base, right? Finn gets rushed off in a stretcher, or on a stretcher. Chewie has his wounds that get tended to, and then we have Rey, and then we have Leia. So we need an emotional beat for Leia, because she just lost her husband, even if slightly estranged, but she just lost her husband. She just lost Han Solo. We need to have this emotional beat with Leia. So, Rey is kind of the main character of the story, so we need her to be part of that story beat. But, you need someone to say, like, well, just because she's the main character, right, this particular emotional scene isn't about her. And the fact that Mark Hamill's point of, like, yeah, Rey and Finn just met Han Solo, like, 20 minutes ago. Obviously they don't want to see him killed, but like his death doesn't mean as much to him. It doesn't mean as much to them as it would, for Chewbacca or Leia or Luke. So, for neither one of them, and maybe they did and they rejected it, but yeah, it's not just like, oh yeah, that was a mistake. It's not like a continuity error, or like the eye line wasn't right in two matching shots. That's like, they went through several iterations of the script and didn't think of this.
It's so funny you bring this, and it's like, again, it's Monday morning quarterbacking of a movie that's been out for 2 years. But it's like, I was thinking about this because I was talking about, I don't know who I was talking to about this, about the idea that Harrison Ford is like, he didn't want to be in that. He didn't want to be in Jedi because he thought Han should sacrifice himself. And then it was the idea that, he came to this movie, and I think everybody who's a fan was like, oh boy, he's coming back, and that means that this movie's Han Solo is going to die, because that's all he's got, this almost fetish. He wants to kill off Han Solo, and his argument would be, oh well, he's got no. I think this is a rough quote. He's got no mama. He's got no papa. He's got no purpose. He needs to sacrifice himself for the story, and I would agree. I mean, nobody knows that character, how to play it better than he did, but when he finally came back, what did he sacrifice? It should have been that thing where it's like, he was, some people have said, oh, he sacrificed himself to Kylo so he could purge the last bit of his goodness out of himself. And what really Han was doing was setting something into motion that'll pay off. And I don't believe that at all. I just believe it was a poorly framed scene. But it could have been like that thing where it's like, it could have been a feint, where the idea that, he approaches Kylo Ren and come back to me, son, and then at some aspect he realizes that his son is gone, and then he flips the switch to cause something to happen, whatever the MacGuffin or the tech as they say, happens to make the shield fall apart and start putting things into motion. Kylo Ren is enraged, kills Han. I mean, I think that would have been much more of a, like, this idea where I feel like the whole ending was kind of just, the whole ending of that movie was a little squidgy. It's just like, you're like, okay, I mean, I love the fight, and I can look past the the idea, like, wow, Rey all of a sudden is this incredible swords person, but they set it up that she had that staff, and so it's like, it's more of a physicality than a force thing, because she taps into the force again to kind of best him, and he's already injured, and so that makes sense. But yeah, this idea that Han, he still never really got to sacrifice himself. I mean, maybe they can make an argument he sacrificed himself trying to save his son, and you know, I'm not a parent, so I don't, probably not the right person to speak on that about, you know, the relationship with a child. But it's like, yeah, narratively, I was like, it doesn't quite work. And then you realize that then they were just kind of playing fast and loose. Like, it's like, it has more to do with, you know, the realization that J.J. Abrams put Luke on that island just for that, to have that shot. And you're like, oh, really? This wasn't like some grand narrative idea that ties into a lot thing. No, I think he just wanted a really killer shot at the end. And he didn't even realize it's like, oh, I should probably have R2-D2 because that's the, you know, that was his, obviously R2-D2 was still his companion even when he was a Jedi master, because that's who he reached out to when his school gets destroyed or whatever. And you're like, yeah, come on, dude, get with the program. Like, I shouldn't be the guy that telling you this, because I know for a fact I'm like the worst. Like, I could never. Somebody said like, "Hey, I want you to write the next Star Wars movie." It's like almost like I have this mental block. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't even know what to do. It's like it's like I have lots of ideas for stories. Then none of them are usually Star Wars ideas. Usually it's like my thing is like, tell me what happened and I'll tell you what I think's wrong with it. It's more like, I understand that it's a daunting task, but the details should be the easiest part. But that's just my take on it.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about Benicio?
Yeah, so a new character in episode 8 will be played by Benicio del Toro, and they've been doing a pretty good job of kind of keeping his role and Laura Dern's role both under wraps a bit. I think one possibility for Benicio del Toro's character previously leaked, you know, a few months ago, but at least this week was probably the closest I think we're coming to getting it right, which is it was leaked that his Benicio del Toro will possibly be playing Gannis Duquesne in episode 8. Now, who is Gannis Duquesne? Well, his name comes up in The Force Awakens when, you know, Han Solo and Chewbacca find the Millennium Falcon. They find Rey and Finn with the Millennium Falcon. And he was like, oh, where did you get this ship? You know, did you steal it from Duquesne? And then Rey says, like, no, I stole it from Unkar Plot, who stole it from so-and-so, who stole it from Duquesne. And then Han says, who stole it from me? Who stole it from me?
I'm stealing it back.
Yeah. So that is the Duquesne of Gannis Duquesne. There's really just the name that's out there. There's no, I think, follow-up information about how big of a role this is or what role he will play in the movie. I think, you know, have the idea of, you know, given that Rey and Finn stole the Millennium Falcon, the idea of, you know, that it's not just Han Solo who's been looking for it all these years. It's other, you know, given this chain of people from whom it was stolen, that you have a lot of people out there trying to get their property back, especially the famous Millennium Falcon. Like, that makes a lot of sense to me, that, you know, is like, oh, hey, here's a fun idea that we can explore in this movie. So that's sort of my take on it. Now, the other piece of this is how big of a character he will be, and as to fill in, Robert and I talked about this before the show, but I finally saw the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie the other day, in which Benicio del Toro plays a role as the Collector. He basically gets one scene. You know, I guess 2 scenes if you count the post-credit sequence, but, you know, really one scene where he provides like a lot of the exposition and backstory for, you know, what the Infinity Stones are, you know, in Marvel. And if you haven't been watching these Marvel movies and you don't know what an Infinity Stone is, it's not important. But, you know, the idea is in the credits, you know, he's given final billing as like, and Benicio del Toro as the Collector. And you're like, oh, wow, this must be a substantial role in the movie. And then it's not, right? So in both his case and Laura Dern, like, these people, they may just be in a scene, right? Glenn Close is in Guardians of the Galaxy, and she maybe has like 3 lines total. You know, she she really does not have a big role. There's no reason for it to be Glenn Close, really.
Well, can I just jump in real quick?
Yeah.
If you think that's weird, you should see the movie Warcraft. She's in it too.
Oh.
And it's weird. Like, she's got one scene and you're like, well, what is Glenn Close doing in this movie?
And is she like the CGI ogre or whatever, or is she a
No,
human,
it's her.
She's just Glenn Close.
She's wearing a hood or something.
Yeah. I mean, you and I have talked about this a little bit, and now that I've actually seen Guardians of the Galaxy, it just drove home for me, right? To a certain extent, I wonder if Star Wars movies, like these Marvel movies now, are just becoming a thing to do, where they're like, hey, I wonder if we can get this famous name. And famous name is like, yeah, I'll make some money. It's not a ton of work. These movies make a ton of money. I'll show up. I'll get either a new set of fans, or it keeps my name out there and everyone gets to talk about like, oh, I can't believe famous actor is in this Marvel movie. And really you have like 3 lines or one scene or whatever. So, I think especially I could see Laura Dern potentially having a larger role, but or maybe not. Maybe she's going to be one of these 3 lines. She's the leader of a planet and they ask for her permission for something and she gives it, and then that's the end. But, with this Gannis Duquesne character, that could either, it sounds almost like my expectations for it are basically, I'm doing it again. Simon Pegg, where it's like, oh, Simon Pegg's in The Force Awakens. Yeah, he had like 2 scenes, and he was just kind of there, and you could barely tell it was him. Benicio del Toro, I don't think is going to get in a ton of makeup, but my hunch is that this won't be a huge role. He's not, for a while it was rumored he was going to play like the clone of Boba Fett or the son of Boba Fett or something.
Yeah, I don't like Vikram Fett or something like that.
Right. It's like, I don't think that's going to be it. I think he's mostly going to be, he'll have a couple scenes where they escape from Gannis Duquesne. They're in mild peril for 10 minutes and then they escape. And it'll be the Rathtar scene all over again. They're in mild peril and then they escape. And it really is just kind of a scene in the middle of the movie because they needed an action beat there. And that's it. So but maybe I'm wrong. Do you think this will be a larger role if this is indeed who he's playing? So
now I don't have any evidence to back this up, but let me just throw this out here. What if, this is, we've heard like little bits and bobs about this movie about like, oh, there's going to be like a casino planet or casino world or something. There's going to be, in Dubrovnik or whatever. There's going to be that kind of thing. Obviously, there's this Duquesne rumor, which I'm excited about this idea that they're being smart and they're tying these things on. But and also the idea that the Falcon's kind of a hot property, and the idea that it almost takes place in the original trilogy, Han Solo's debt, which was a real big, it was a minor thing in the original version. It gets expanded a little bit in the special edition, and it's referred to, it's a major plot point in Empire, this idea that he owes somebody money and it's compromised his safety and whatnot. So the idea that the pedigree of the Falcon is kind of up for grabs a little bit, and that this guy might be trying to reclaim it, I kind of find that exciting. It kind of it's adding a similar thing, but in a new way. That also brings the idea, like maybe he's going to be kind of a Lando type character, that he might show up later in the movie. And we know, sadly, Billy Dee's probably not going to be brought back for this movie, or even if he's got a cameo and he's been very good about hiding it, it's going to be very, very minor, which I've not heard any rumor, because he basically explicitly said, I'm not in this, so I'm going to take him at his word. So they're going to need us, where's the scoundrel in this movie? Who have we heard? There's not, Han was the original scoundrel, so it's kind of great. You see that, in The Force Awakens, he's still pulling the same ass stuff. He's still ripping people off. He's kind of gone back to his old crappy ways. He's not a particularly good husband. It's like he's a scoundrel. And that is an archetype that, that was sadly missed in the prequels. I think it was done to less than completely satisfying degree in Rogue One. I mean, Cassian could be a bit of a scoundrel, and the idea that he, had to do what he'd do to get his job done and blah, blah, blah. I mean, I guess there's no explicit... Actually, in some ways, Krennic is the scoundrel. But that idea of the archetype, the scoundrel, the person who's not necessarily evil, but they're all right to take a situation and manipulate it to their benefit. And I feel like, thinking of like the roles that Benicio has played, it's like, I can't think of anybody that would be better than him, thinking about Usual Suspects. And, unfortunately, he was criminally underused in Guardians of the Galaxy and his little thing. He had a little thing in Thor. And cross my fingers, maybe this Infinity thing, because he's in it, he'll have a better thing. But I'm more interested in him maybe being pretty important. Not to say that it's going to be like note for note a Lando thing where he's kind of a pain in the ass and he betrays them, but he turns out to be an all right guy. But maybe a person of questionable moral standing. Where it's like, I don't know if I can. We don't really know much about Lando until Jedi, that he's a stand-up guy. Yeah, we know he saved the heroes, but he never really, showed his heroism until like maybe he actually helped to undo the problem that he helped create. So, I mean, not that every scoundrel has to be like, oh, in the end he had a heart of gold, but the idea that he's this kind of crime boss, maybe, because there is no Jabba the Hutt. There was no real taste that in The Force Awakens that there was a real palpable underworld. Yes, Maz Kanata's castle, but it was like, I'm sorry, it's like that whole sequence is my least favorite part of that whole film. Is like, was there really any sense of menace to anything in that cantina in The Force Awakens? It was like, Han totally oversold, like, don't look at anybody, and it's like they walk in and what do? We all just look at people. There was nobody knocked Finn's drink out of his hand for looking at him crossways. So my point is that there's not really that kind of some of the fun kind of underworldy stuff. Cross my fingers, hope maybe that's what we're getting here. But then again, your idea is completely possible. It'll be a thing where, well, it's
I think there could be a middle ground here, right? And I take your point too that, right, just because Duquesne stole the Millennium Falcon, allegedly stole the Millennium Falcon from Han, or has some kind of claim to ownership, that doesn't necessarily and might be trying to get the ship back. That doesn't mean that character has to be sinister,
right?
And maybe because it's Benicio del Toro and the kind of characters he typically plays, we think that it's going to be this kind of like intense, shadowy figure, or someone who who's going to be, there's going to be this kind of undercurrent of tension when he's on screen or something like that. But that's not necessarily true. It could be that he certainly doesn't he's not a protagonist in this movie, but that doesn't necessarily that he means harm to the protagonist. He could just be I'm trying to get my ship back. I just want my ship back.
Or he could be like, hey, he sold it to me. He just told everybody I stole it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. He could have the title and deed of ownership, whatever that looks like in the Star Wars universe. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to be optimistic because I really like him, and ever since I've heard that he's gonna be in this, I was like, I'm like, I want as much as I can get. But again, they have been playing it, when they don't talk a lot of. Again, I don't know. If he had been a part of this, that would have been like a really exciting thing to have had at Celebration, like, here's it's like, here's this guy, his name's Duquesne, and it's like, Benicio like sends a video in, like, I'm real excited to be playing him or whatever. The idea that he hasn't really been part of the the thing initially I thought, oh, they're being secretive, and maybe it's more of kind of like, yeah, you're right, it's a small part, it's a 10-minute sequence in the movie, and he's going to be like, oh, drat, foiled again, and maybe he'll show up in 9. I don't know. It's, again, I'm hoping it's like maybe he's going to be kind of he's that scoundrel character, because I mean, as far as I can tell, it's like from every rumor that I've collected in the last year or whatever, it's a lot of there's going to be like 3 stories going on in this, maybe 4 or in this movie. So it's like there's going to be room. There's going to be an awful lot of story to be told. I mean, there's the Luke and Rey story, and the Finn and the Rose. I mean, are we entirely sure that Rose is oh gosh, what's her name?
Kelly Marie Tron.
Yeah, because Rose was a code name for another character, I guess, for Maz Kanata or something. They called her Rose in production or something, and then changed it.
I mean, I guess. Yeah, I think at Celebration, Kelly Marie Tron referred to her character as Rose.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if they're saying it openly, they wouldn't. It's just such a non-Star Wars name. Maybe it's ROZ or something, or I don't know.
Yeah, it could be.
But yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic.
I think her character's name actually is Rose.
But again, like you've said, a lot of times there's so many people in this movie. It's like, and it's hard to know, because I remember, I'm pretty sure it was Adrian Edmondson from the Young Ones or whatever. He was supposedly in this movie.
Oh, that's right.
We talked about that, but I mean, who knows? It might just be a thing where he's the guy at the door,
Right.
It's hard if they didn't drag him out at Celebration. You do wonder how big of a role these people have in any of these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Kylo Ren's TIE Fighter.
Yeah, Kylo Ren has a new TIE Fighter that we found out how else, because they started advertising the toy, and people noticed, hey, that toy doesn't look like anything we've seen before, and so they took a photo of it. They're like, oh, I guess Kylo Ren has a new TIE Fighter in this movie. Now, I assume that this is true. I mean, sometimes they make up fake vehicles for people, or, we get vehicles that were part of the early versions of the story that then did not make it to the final cut of the movie, right? So I think there were those like Snow Speeder, the First Order Snow Speeder toys that I don't think we saw.
It's in a deleted scene, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, it's not in the theatrical version. Right. So, but I would assume something like this is big enough that this will be in the movie. So it looks like, picture Vader's special fighter, where it looks like a TIE Fighter, but the middle is kind of elongated a little bit, and it has the special wings, except in Kylo Ren's case, it's basically TIE Interceptor wings with, the points on the end, and of course there's that white and black First Order color scheme. So that's what it looked like to me, at least. Maybe there's some details I missed that Robert, you caught, but certainly that would be in keeping with this idea that Kylo Ren idolizes Darth Vader and wants to be like him. And so he's like, well, if Darth Vader got his own, special fighter, then I should too, which is interesting. I mean, we don't know anything. I mean, that's really all we know about Kylo Ren, right? We don't know anything about him being a pilot. We don't know anything about, his skills in combat, at least in A New Hope. Before we knew that Darth Vader was Anakin Skywalker, right? There was other dialogue that kind of gave the sense that, like, oh, he's going to be really good and powerful, and he's going to be a good pilot. I think maybe I'm misremembering, but when he's like, oh, prepare my ship, and he was like, oh, okay, so he must have his own ship, he must be good. I assume that the same is going to be true of Kylo Ren then, and it would make sense passing it down from Anakin Skywalker to Luke Skywalker to Ben Solo. Fine. I am a little, I just wish this comes down to, again, creative choices that were kind of handed down from J.J. Abrams and Lord Kasdan, but it's like, I kind of wish they had gone in a slightly different direction, and that it wasn't right, because I think this is just going to invite more of the same criticisms of like, oh, this is just like the original trilogy. You gave him his own fighter, just like the original trilogy with Darth Vader. Right? It's like, yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, they have to like ignore all that and just do whatever they want to do, and do whatever fits the story. And in this case, it fits the story and it fits who that character is. But part of me is also like, I wish you had done something a little more left field and gone in a completely different direction with this, rather than just make everything look like everything else.
Right. Well, I mean, that the funny thing is that, so I'm looking at this image, and what it happened, it leaked as a toy, I think you said. The image I've been seeing floating around was somebody's painting of it. It was like a fan rendering. So it's like you only ever see it. You only see the wings on this. So nobody actually can tell what the cockpit looks like, because it's only shown from like the back quadrant. And it's like this guy made a supposition that it was like, oh, it's going to look like a TIE fighter. I don't really know where they're getting this from, but something a hexagonal shape, nod, blah blah blah. But they never show the cockpit, so it could be a little bit more different. And I don't really understand.
It could look more like his shuttle, I guess, which basically didn't have much of a cockpit. I don't think.
And why did they say this is Kylo Ren's? Just because it's kind of Darth Vader shaped?
That's what I'm guessing. I can't remember if the toy catalog said it was Kylo Ren's TIE fighter. Let me look that up real quick.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, but I understand that they as much as I've had my thing like, why didn't they make it? Why didn't they invert like the old Star Wars thing and make the First Order use like army surplus type stuff, and then that the Resistance had new stuff? But yeah, I mean, there's so many different little inversions of things that they could do. I mean, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's
the catalog just refers to it as Kylo Ren's Starfighter.
Oh, okay, so yeah. Again, they don't want to reinvent the wheel, I guess. They don't really want to.
Mm-hmm.
I think they've kind of settled on that final image, and they just want to do variations on that theme. It's like the bad guys are kind of in a TIE fighter, and the good guys are kind of in an X-wing, and it's.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're kind of stuck. I mean, as much as I'd love the idea that, like, let's have different types of stormtroopers, almost kind of like the Rogue One thing, where it's like they created all new stormtroopers that, like the beach troopers and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But they were able to kind of still be able to manipulate the design. Again, I'm not a huge fan of most of the stormtroopers, the First Order stormtroopers. The armor design just didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from like your regular troopers, which I thought were fine, but it's just like the flame troopers and the snow troopers. I didn't think they did a good job on the design. They almost look cartoonish.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, this could be all right. I mean, who knows how much space battle, or if we're going to see him kind of take up the mantle of being a pilot. And this would be a design for something that would be fast and deadly, which is kind of how Vader was in he only ever flew in that first movie, but
mm-hmm.
Again, it's like I'm
I like the TIE Interceptor design, so to bring that back, I'm happy about that. But yeah, I do kind of just wish they would just stop making everything look like everything else, because then it's like, all right, well, I mean, and I get the idea of design evolution and you want to keep some consistent looks to it, but I think the range of and how far they could have gone and taken it and changed it was probably larger than they thought it was.
It's funny you bring that up, because I think it was on the Blu-ray of Rogue One. They had Doug Chang was talking about the designing of the U-wing and how they went through we went through like 200 iterations before.
It was like there were like 700 small sketches,
and it was just like, that's what you came up with. It had 700 sketches. It's like, I understand it, like it's functional, although stylistically it wasn't the U-wing wasn't as interesting to me. But
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
for the
me
purpose
neither.
that it served, I thought it was interesting to the story. The idea that, like, I mean, one of the little sequences I like is during the ground battle when that lady kind of like looks over and it's like she's landing and everybody jumps out and runs out. I mean, I think that's really cool. Although I think the ship itself, the design of the ship isn't particular enough to be kind of cool for what it's used when they go to Jeddah, which always, like, that's I don't want to go too far in the weeds, but it always kind of bugged me that, like, how are they able to get on that planet without anybody noticing? Like, that's a rebel ship. They, like, they all go, like, it's like the First Order and the Empire, they, like, basically go to a specific place and get these ships made. It's almost like you can tell by the design. It's like, oh, it's a blank wing. Oh, it's probably the Rebellion, because they all shop at the same store.
And the book doesn't deal with that either, the novelization. So I think, they must not monitor incoming traffic into Jeddah very well.
Exactly.
Very strenuously.
It was like they were too busy getting all that Kyber Skrilla. And they're not really, we're not particularly worried about people coming and going, but whatever. I mean, that's little plot holes or whatever. But no, it's, I'm kind of interested a little bit, like, in these new ships that were in the trailer, that they kind of look like kind of the medical frigate, I think. Is it? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's whatever the ship that Luke and Leia are on at the end of Empire. It's kind of, it looks like
it looks like the medical frigate, except with, like, kind of the back piece lopped off.
Yeah, they've kind of redesigned it.
So you get the one thing hanging down, but then it's like an L shape.
I think we're gonna get something a little different in this. So I'm okay with that. So again, it's like they're really, it's serving the fans and serving the grumpy guys with podcasts, and they're like, I don't know how to make you people happy. It's like, if we make it too different, you get mad. If we make it too similar, you're mad. And it's almost like an unenviable task. But I understand your criticisms, and for sure. But I don't think I got a problem with this one.
All right.
So we're kind of at this. We're kind of at a nexus. Do we want to do the Thrawn thing, or do we want to?
Let's review Thrawn.
Okay. So I guess you're way better at synopsis.
I read the book.
I read
the book. You listened to the audiobook. So it's been a few weeks since I read the book. So this is the story of Admiral Thrawn's rise through the ranks of the Empire, right? So when it starts, he is kind of discovered on this planet out in wild space, out in kind of the border regions where the Empire ends and uncharted, the stuff that they don't know much about begins. So he's living alone on this planet. It seems like there's evidence that someone has been living there for a while. He actually doesn't make an appearance initially. There's mystery surrounding it, right? Like, all of these, they go to this planet, stormtroopers keep disappearing, and so they know someone is there and someone's kind of messing with them, but they don't know who it is, and it turns out to be Thrawn. That part, I thought it was a very effective introduction to the character in the book. Anyway, so they meet Thrawn. He says he's been exiled from the Chiss Ascendancy. He basically pledges loyalty to the Empire. He said, I was part of the Navy, sign me up. They start him at a relatively low rank. I think he starts out as like a lieutenant or a lieutenant commander or something like that. And the book is about how he works his way up through the ranks through a series of strategic victories, in various ways. And that's the book. So more detail added to that would be, he's assigned an aide, Eli Vanto, who himself is from wild space, and so he speaks with an accent, which Robert can talk about how that shows up on the audiobook. But so he speaks with his accent. It's not that, if you think of Tarkin or Krennic or the Emperor, that kind of British English that is supposed to signify kind of Coruscant and the political elite of the Empire. Eli Vanto speaks with some kind of weird accent that basically labels him as being a hick. And so he is assigned as a aide to Thrawn because being in wild space, his family owns some kind of like shipping or trading company. And so he speaks a language that has some linguistic similarities, some linguistic roots shared with Thrawn's language. And so he's kind of an interpreter slash basic tutor slash, military aide. And so through the course of this book, Thrawn kind of cultivates Vanto. Eli Vanto initially is held back because, they can't punish Thrawn. And so they get to him by punishing Eli Vanto, but eventually that changes. And so, Eli Vanto stays at his side throughout. It's also about the rise of Arinda Pryce, who is seen in Star Wars Rebels. She is the governor of Lothal. She's originally from Lothal. Again, her parents own some kind of manufacturing company that gets essentially nationalized by the Empire. And so she moves to Coruscant and becomes like a low-level caseworker for Lothal's senator there. She moves her way up and eventually becomes the governor of Lothal, again, through various political, strategic maneuvers. At a certain point in the book, Pryce and Thrawn cross paths a few times, and then eventually she kind of stretches out this idea of a political alliance where she'll help him navigate the political world, which he's not very good at, and he can help her, kind of strategize of how to get ahead. The main, I don't know if you'd say antagonist, but the person that Thrawn is essentially fighting throughout this whole thing is someone with the codename of Night Swan, who is going around first, I guess is sort of lends himself out as a contractor where other planets, other people who might want to rise up either against the Empire or against, the manufacturing company that the Empire is running on their planet, in some way they want to express their displeasure with their living conditions. They can hire out Night Swan, who will come in with resources and strategy and help them figure out how to effectively combat the Empire or just the rule on their planet. And so he basically helps, insurrections around the galaxy. Obviously, the Empire doesn't want that, and so Thrawn gets sent out to all of these places, and he ends up, crossing paths with Night Swan. At the end of the book, it's revealed that Thrawn was not actually exiled. That was just a cover story that he and his superiors in the Chiss Ascendancy came up with as a way for him to, in some ways, infiltrate the Empire, not because he wants to take the Empire down, really, but because they also know the Chiss have learned of other threats outside of the Empire, out in wild space or the unknown regions or wherever, other threats that are out there that may, in fact, pose more of a danger to the Chiss than does the Empire. And so part of what Thrawn was doing was trying to figure out, okay, who can I cultivate? Who can I find to then send back to the Chiss Ascendancy and help work for them and work with the Chiss to kind of plan for these other emerging threats. And so he tries to get Night Swan to do it. Night Swan says no. And so Eli Vanto at the very end, he ends up leaving the Empire and actually goes to work for the Chiss Ascendancy, kind of in Thrawn's place, right? Over the course of this book, Thrawn kind of cultivates Eli Vanto's strategic thinking, right? Eli Vanto initially, he just wants to be like an acquisitions officer because that's, his family owns this trading business. That's what he wants to do. That's what he's good at. He's almost a little bit like, never mind. I can't think of her name, so I won't waste time trying to think of her name. But we've seen similar characters in other of the new canon Star Wars books. But, so over the course of this book, Thrawn has kind of taught Eli Vanto how to think strategically and cultivated his strategic thinking abilities, so that he can send Eli Vanto back to the Chiss kind of in his place, and have Eli Vanto help the Chiss kind of strategize and try to come up with ways to counter these emerging threats that go unnamed. I should say they're just kind of referred to vaguely, but that's the book. And by the end, Thrawn has ascended to the rank of Grand Admiral. He's had several, visitations with the Emperor or the Empire. The Emperor plays a small role in this, but he crops up occasionally to check in with Thrawn. And so that's the book. It doesn't really have like one. I mean, they kind of build towards one final confrontation between Thrawn and Night Swan, but it's not like a big event where this is really the climax of this book. It's a little more subtle. It's a little less kind of obvious that way. It's really more about learning about Thrawn, about how he thinks, about how he rose through the ranks of the Empire, and then also learning this kind of brand new piece, which is what he's doing for the Chiss ascendancy, and the fact that he joined the Empire. The Empire was a way to still aid the Chiss back where he's from. So that's Thrawn in a nutshell. Sort of, it's a big nutshell. But Robert, what did you think of this book?
I don't know, when they announced that they were going to do that, that Timothy Zahn was returning to this character and that Thrawn was going to be on Rebels, I was really excited. I mean, initially I was excited about the Rebels because I thought, well, that's, it's the kind of like they're paying homage to the previous continuity. They're not just throwing out the baby with the bathwater. They're bringing in the great stuff. And then when I thought there was going to be a tie-in book with his, quote, his backstory, I was like, well, this is really going to be an interesting kind of a fortuitous thing because, I'd read the original, the Thrawn trilogy back in the 90s, and then I read like the visions of the future and the visions of the past, which Thrawn is not in them, but it's an actor playing Thrawn. It's like this kind of convoluted story. And by the end of that, I was kind of like, well, it's not really Thrawn, so I don't really care. And then he would guest star in Outbound Flight, which was a Legends canon I did not read, and then I think he shows up in another. So I'm not super familiar with any of the stuff that has been done post Visions of the Future, but I honestly thought we were going to get kind of a biography, like this idea of how did Thrawn become Thrawn. I don't think, of course the character could just be like, oh, he was born that way. And that's one way to tell it. But to me, it would have been way more interesting if we'd gotten a story about, him kind of maybe his life up to the point where he actually encounters the Empire for the first time. Because what they actually ended up doing, it's like they basically handed us the Thrawn that we've already known and just kind of did it a little fish out of water. The fact that he's not in the Empire. I just feel like this was a real missed opportunity. There's a lot of like kind of, in my estimation, a lot of kind of rank amateurish kind of storytelling, which is just kind of shocking for Thrawn, who's like should know this character in and out. It just, I don't know if it's a situation where his hands were tied at the kind of story that he was allowed to tell. It's like, well, we want something tied that we can tie into Rebels, so we don't want to go back too far. It just, it was like, and then in some sequences, I felt like he was guest starring in his own novel, where it was like he was off screen a lot. And like, yeah, they did this narrative thing where he goes and he observes people's like, oh, his lips tighten, his forehead wrinkles, his heartbeat increases, therefore it means this. But I feel like we never kind of break through, and I feel like I don't know anything more about Thrawn that I did 20 years ago when I read those books. So it felt like it was just like, yeah, this was sold as kind of like Thrawn. You're gonna figure out how he got in the Empire, and it's like, yeah, that's basically, he shows up, and to use an oft used phrase, he kind of early on he Mary Sue's his way right into the story, which is really strange. The fact that, he shows up and he gets an audience with the Emperor, and the Emperor's deferring to him. He's calling him by his given name, and rather than, because Thrawn is short for something like this long name, almost like a Wookiee name, with Thrawn somewhere in the middle, and the Emperor is treats him with all this respect, and he it's just odd. He goes, I know some things out in the world that you might want to know about. Oh, okay, I'll give you a job. It was just very odd. It was just, I feel like there should have been more of a reason. The idea, and then it's been hinted many times in the different books, and some people have said, oh, this is they're doffing. Some people say, oh, this is a Yuuzhan Vong, which is later on in the Legends continuum was kind of an alien race of religious zealots that just kind of start taking over the Star Wars universe. It was 19 books. I've only read a few of them. It was kind of a long drawn out story. Then that kind of stuff is mentioned in the Truce at Bakura, which was not one of the first. Maybe it was the fourth or the fifth book, book that it takes place right after.
It was early in the post Thrawn.
Yeah, it takes place right after Return of the Jedi. It explains that the Emperor has been looking for threats outside, and it's hinted at there too. So this isn't nothing new, but this idea that the Emperor just Thrawn says, "Oh, I could help you with all the stuff you don't know," and he just goes, "Okay." It's that didn't really. It just. There's no conflict in this book. It's just it's like that.
No, it's very much there's no grand plan here, right? It's not that an original Thrawn trilogy where he had chess pieces that he moved, and first he got the Merker, and then he got the cloning tanks, and then he got this thing set up, and then he got that thing set up. And then, it all led to this kind of large overarching plan to take down the New Republic or whatever. That's not what's going on here. And so, it's very much a smaller kind of story. And to your earlier point too, it's mostly told, the Thrawn piece of it is mostly told through the eyes of Eli Vanto, right? Eli Vanto is kind of the audience stand-in here, the reader stand-in here, learning about Thrawn, as the reader learns about Thrawn. This isn't like a big, tentpole, this is changing everything we know about the Star Wars universe. This is just Thrawn worked his way up through a series of strategic victories and proved himself smarter than a lot of other people. And that's it. And oh, okay, nice.
Yeah, and it's an odd thing to do when considering. Well, I mean, of course, I'm only really referring to books that I've read, and I think that I think since you've read the Tarkin book, that correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of it deals with the interior bureaucracy of the Empire and how you work your way through it. Well, it's okay, we've got is about the internal bureaucracy of government, namely the Empire, which happens in this. And we did Catalyst, which had a lot to do with that, and even Bloodline has a lot to do with the inner workings of government. And it just feels wow, this is they're telling this boring story from 8 different angles.
And A New Dawn, the antagonist is a government efficiency expert, right? And so all of his stuff is about supply lines and supply chains and all that kind of thing. I take your point. It is kind of an odd way to do it. I mean, I think partly it may be that they don't want to step on the toes of the movies and whatever they're developing there, because they don't want to kind of set out a big event in the books that then prevent the movies. Someone then comes there, oh, I want to make a movie about X, and you're like, well, sorry, you can't do that because we published a book that this would contradict, and I think they've also, they've been contradicting some of the Legends stuff, but in relatively small ways, right? So, I mean, I don't think Timothy Zahn would want to do this, certainly, but I don't even know if the Lucasfilm Story Group really is ready to completely contradict, that initial Thrawn trilogy, right? And so with the story of Thrawn, you're going to keep it a little smaller, and you're going to set it during a time period that doesn't it all bleed into the later events or the earlier events, right? You're going to kind of put it in this middle period where Timothy Zahn hasn't written about that part of Thrawn's life yet. I think I liked this book more than you did. I thought I liked it fine. I one thing I did appreciate was that a lot of Timothy Zahn's previous writing tics and tropes and whatever else you want to call them from his earlier Star Wars books are not present here. So, in his trilogy, in the Thrawn trilogy, and in the Outbound Flight books, and in the later Mara Jade duology, Allegiance, and Choices of One, people would say point, right? Like, well, what about, we could do this? Well, but if we did that, then this thing would happen. Point. I mean, like, oh yeah, you have a point there. But they would just say point. And it would show up everywhere, and everyone kind of talked the same. That kind of stuff is much less present in this book, to the point where it's almost kind of like an anti-style. Like, you don't really notice the writer's style as much. Like it doesn't call attention to itself as much, which I appreciate. And I appreciate more so, I think, for this kind of, like big franchise tie-in novel where you have a bunch of different people all contributing to the same thing. So that was a pleasant surprise. I think it really, it does, I mean, calling it Thrawn, and I mean, this is a convention that they've been doing for a while now, right? You had Kenobi, you have Tarkin, you have Thrawn, you had Darth Plagueis, right? Just naming books after the title character, and like the name of the character is the name of the book. That's a convention that they've been doing for a while now. But I think in some ways, it sets reader expectations, and you're a testament to this, right? It sets reader expectations that don't match the book. I mean, this novel is really a prequel to Star Wars Rebels Season 3. Yes. Right? This kind of introduces Price, it introduces Thrawn to show how they get to the point where they are when we see them, when they show up in Season 3 of Rebels. Which I think is perfectly fine and good and helpful and kind of fits a little bit in with the New Dawn in that way. I don't begrudge any of that. I think that's a good idea. But calling this is a prequel novel to Star Wars Rebels Season 3, doesn't carry the same weight as like, this is about Thrawn and how Thrawn got to his position. Right. When Governor Price showed up, and then when she had such a large role as she did, I was surprised because maybe I just didn't remember reading about that earlier, but I was like, oh, this is as much a book about her as it is about Thrawn in a lot of ways. And so, I think the way they titled it, and certainly that, Thrawn's face is the cover of the book, it can be a little misleading, and set expectations that maybe don't match what the book actually does.
Yeah, and I think I've definitely suffered from that because, the Price thing, although I honestly, in some ways, it's more interesting, although I don't feel like the story gets the full chance to breathe. The idea, like, her parents owned a mine, it was taken over by somebody, and then in a bid for her parents for them to be able to, I don't know, save it, they nationalize it or whatever you call it, give it over to the empire.
Right. It's essentially like other countries, like say Venezuela, they nationalize the industry by saying, okay, these oil companies all belong to the government now. That's essentially what the empire did with Arinda Price's family's manufacturing concern. There's like, all right, well, if you sell this to the empire, then we'll make sure that we don't fire any of the employees, essentially.
Yeah, and really her story is kind of, it's an interesting, because it's like, she's not my favorite character on Rebels, and I haven't really given her much of a thought. But it kind of showed you, like, okay, well, this is how she did it. It wasn't like a situation where she was like, she didn't put, like, you get the one takeaway I get, which is kind of strange, is like, wow, she really put in the work. You know what I mean? It's like she's ultimately evil, I think.
Right.
But I think she...
Well, and
yeah, she worked at it. It wasn't like you know what I mean? It was a thing where she was naive. She thought, oh, this is how you get ahead. And then she found out, like, not everybody is, was altruistic as she was. And then she had to adjust herself. And, she became much more Machiavellian. She would look for, weakness in the armor to be able to go after people. I mean, I don't think she obviously ends, she wants she actually, her goals, even Thrawn, I think it was Thrawn, or maybe it was, no, it was Tarkin, who makes an appearance in this, kind of, goes like, well, that's all you want? You want Lethal? Okay, you can have that. It's like, her goals are actually small, but she worked very hard but it was a tactical thing. I think she realized in her time on Coruscant that, bald face ambition opens you to a lot more problems than being specific about what you want. And that's the weird thing. It's like, the takeaway of this book is I understood a lot more about her, which is fine, but why don't you call it something else instead of like this idea? Right. It's like, I was thinking I was going to be like, Thrawn, like, was like, oh, when it started out that he'd been exiled, I was thinking like, oh, we're going to find, midway through the book, it's going to jump back and we're going to find out what the whole deal about being exiled was. And it's like, did he have a family? What was his parents like? But no, instead, I don't know if this is Zahn's take or Disney's take or Lucasfilm or whatever. It's like, they didn't give you any, I don't feel like I knew anything more about him, really. It's like, okay, the Chiss, and like people like, they're supposed to be mysterious, but then everybody seems to know about the Chiss. And it's all like, all the people that should know about it, like the Emperor knows about them. The Vanto family know about the Chiss. Yep. It just so happens that they land on this planet and he knows how to speak this Cybisti language that the Chiss speak. A lot of it is just like, that's the one stylistic thing that Zahn has that he unfortunately kept. A lot of everything is just coincidence. Like, oh, it just happened to be that the right person was in the right place at the right time, which for the kind of story they're telling, coincidence doesn't always ring true. I mean, I would concede that the writing is good. I mean, it's not like a thing where, oh God, the dialogue. It's like he got rid of a lot of his tics. It's the points and that kind of stuff. But again, I will also concede that maybe part of my take on the story was the audio performance. Although I would say this Mark Thompson guy did a good job with Price. He did a good job with Thrawn. He basically tried to take the Mickelson approach and do he did. I think Mark Thompson may have done the Catalyst as well, and he made a great effort to kind of do a version of the Galen Erso dialogue. So it was actually, when that was it was very true. The Vanto thing, because he was supposed to be in outer space, he did kind of, and again, I'm not an expert on accents. I thought it might have been it kind of talks like this, kind of like a Georgian. I mean, I don't know a Mississippi from a Louisiana from a Kentucky accent, so I'm not on Southern accent. But he does a kind of a Southern accent. At least my take on it. Maybe if you heard it, you'd be like, I have never heard anybody talk like that in my life. The problem is that he does it. Like, he'll throw in the parents and like the character of his mother. I don't know if I said this on air or we just talked about it. He sounded like Vicki Lawrence from Mama's Family.
Right.
What you doing? Are you one of them Chiss? that kind of thing. Vinton, what are you doing? And you're just like, ugh. You're kind of like, wow, that. It's almost to the point where it's
Or that also sounds to be like Dustin Hoffman and Tootsie.
Oh yeah,
Right, like his Tootsie accent, which is awful.
my name is Dorothy Michaels. Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
Actually, that would say it would be more. The mother was more like that. I mean, the Eli Vanto character, it was kind of like. Well, I mean, let me just finish the one thing about the voices. The God, I can't remember who was the Miranda Price's friend that was kind of more of a social climber.
Oh, yeah, I don't remember.
Wait, I don't
her
really.
name.
She wasn't a very good character, and all of a sudden she's a kung fu dojo.
Right, she was a she was a bodyguard instructor.
No, so you've read that story. Now imagine it with the Liz character that Nick Kroll does on the Kroll Show. She talks like this the whole time. It's like, I just got bangs. And you're just like, oh my Lord. It's like, I don't know how they make audiobooks, but someone should have tapped him on the shoulder and said, dude, it's too much. It's too much. It's distracting. And where I honestly, that whole character, I was like, I'm so tired of this character. Every time she would come on, and I like good female characters, especially in Star Wars books, because sometimes, they can be, in the past they've been lacking, but this is the guy that came up with Mara Jade, and I felt like, not that I'm looking for a substitute Mara Jade, but he kind of got there halfway with Price, but I felt like I could have done with if it was, she was going to be a big part of this, we could have gone to a little bit more, because it does jump ahead a few years about in the middle of the book. I mean, going back to the story, it's the Vanto thing was a little like it didn't. They kept having come up with excuses to have why would Eli Vanto be there, and also it's the idea that okay, if Thrawn is a special project from the Emperor himself, there's no way that wouldn't have filtered down. Why would anybody mess with anybody that was kind of like the Emperor's special project? So there's a little bit of like that school ties situation going on. Like there's like a harassment of Thrawn at the academy, and it's like I don't know. I understand that they're maybe trying to, play up, because that's one of the things that harkens all the way back to the West End games, is that the Empire was like a humans only club, and that's right. They never really play that in the movies very hard, and probably to their benefit. But when you expand it to a book, part of the thing about why the Empire is evil is that it's kind of a humans first situation. That's why you don't see a lot. It's why you don't see stormtroopers with flippers. They're speciesist. Yeah, they're speciesist. So they're making a bigger comment on bigotry and whatever. But it's the idea that they throw him in there, and it's like he just like, no, you have to go to school with the rest of the kids, and you're like, oh really? Is this? If I really have to have him go to the academy, and then I have to hear about Eli Vanto. Like, I really wish I could just be a cargo guy. It's like it's like I can't wait to get back to my really boring job. I'm sure it's like he's messing up my career, and it's like you're probably eating better than you've ever eaten, and you're getting to go on these ships in this adventure, and he's just complaining about he can't wait to get back to his boring job, and that didn't very true, because really he's only there to be someone for Thrawn to talk to and to do his Thrawny stuff. He's like Captain Pelion, which I feel like they really kind of missed a chance to reintroduce that character. I mean, the Chimera ship that he commands is there. Maybe that's something they're saving for Rebels season 4. Maybe. But now they've established that Price and Thrawn have this working relationship. I mean, it might even have been interesting if they'd had a physical relationship, if they'd been like romantic. Anybody, you know what I mean? There's like, I know that I say that there's no, it's, really no sex in Star Wars, and it gets boring when they try to do it. But honestly, this story, it was so bland. I could have dealt with some kind of, maybe the fact that Price had a crush on Thrawn and he's too weird and alien to pick up on it would have been enough. Not that you have to, the lady has to have a boyfriend or whatever. I'm not trying to, I'm just trying to. I wanted some spice. I wanted some excitement. It just felt very much, very run of the mill. It's like, and it's also really hard to root for the space Nazis again. It's like,
right.
It's like you're telling this big story, and I'm going to go with you, but let's humanize, or I'm just going to say humanize because these are all human archetypes that they're dealing with, even if they're Star Wars aliens. I mean, let's give them something. Let's humanize Thrawn and the idea of I'm just trying to protect the Chiss. I'm like, okay, that's fine, but what are your personal things? It's like ever since I was a child, I've been, I've seen patterns, or anything to kind of, It would have been nice if Thrawn had been because the whole time I felt like he was 95% there. He was 95% Thrawn. It was just the framework of the Empire took him the rest of the 5%. I would have liked to have seen the 60% Thrawn, and we'd have gotten that last 40% in the book. Like, maybe he was a little naive. Maybe this is thing, and then something. Eli Vanto gets shot or something and dies, and he realizes that
right.
I've got this weakness and I need to fix it because my weakness caused my partner to die. Or my helper or whatever, it would have. I wanted some growth, and Miranda Price, she gets all that growth, and that's good, and that makes her actually more interesting than the person. Not that, and again, I'm not like I don't really want a Price book. I felt like I've gotten her story now, so it's not like I left being like hungry for more, but I was like, oh, I read this entire book about a guy, and I felt like I didn't know a single thing about him more than I did when I opened it up. And it's like, wow. And this is and it's written by, this isn't some like, fly by night author that they got to go. This is the guy that created the character. I mean, he's the reason that Coruscant exists. And Lucasfilm felt it was very important to bring him back to do this. I just wish the end result had been worth it. So, I mean, that's kind of my take on it.
I mean, I will say, I like you, or maybe I'm projecting, but I think what I'm hearing from you is I had felt something similar, which is that I was never really sure, like, okay, so am I supposed to like cheer the fact that Thrawn is racking up these victories? Like, ultimately, Night Swan is helping local populations, rebel against oppression and the Empire, and even if it's on their local level, whatever else, like those are the good guys, right? And so the fact that Thrawn is like thwarting them, I mean, I guess, in many cases he does it without killing anyone, right? He uses his strategic thinking to like bring everyone to a stalemate, or to make sure that the Empire's interests are preserved without resorting to like outright oppression, and putting his boots on the ground down and bringing the planet to heel. Like I got that as like, I see what you're doing, but he's still like in service of the Galactic Empire, which is bad. And so the fact that then it was like, well, there's this other threat that may be even more dangerous than the Empire. It's like, okay, but that doesn't make the Empire good,
right.
And so I mean, to the extent that may or may not tie into what they're doing with the new movies, with Snoke, or what they're going to bring in, the books that take place just after Aftermath. Aftermath was a very underrated TV show, by the way. I love Klinger.
Going back to, what was it? Where was he in Cleveland, Ohio, or something? Wasn't that? Was it Skokie, Illinois? Who was?
Probably Skokie. Skokie's a funnier word, so it was probably Skokie.
Sorry.
Yeah. Anyway, so no. I got I lost track of my own. Anyway, it's
Not as bad as Monster
maybe that's
Math.
where they're taking this thing, that there's this outside threat, this threat out in wild space beyond what we've even thought of. Like, as you've noted, they've done that before with the Yuzon Vong and the Searook, right? They've done that before. Great, fine, but that again, that doesn't make the Empire good. And so that if the Empire is like,
well, it kind of feels like
I don't know. It's like, yeah, just I'll bring it back to what I started out saying, which is I was never sure, like, am I supposed to be rooting for Thrawn because he's still helping the Empire oppress all of these other planets? So, like, yeah, he's smart, but to what end?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like he's like, what is that's like? Well, am I breaking into people's houses and stealing their food? And then when they confront me, I go, yeah, but we could be getting bombed by North Korea any time now. And it's like, well, okay, whatever. I mean, one doesn't really necessarily have what to do with the other. It doesn't excuse it. Like, well, I'm getting food in case we get bombed. It's like, okay. And that was his whole thing where it's like, well, I'm just protecting my people. But again, show me some of these people that are show me why they're so damn important to him. Does he have a wife?
Yeah.
Does he have a mother? Does he have a brother? Does he have a husband? I mean, tell me something. Give me something that makes me like go like, okay, well, I can understand. It's like he was up against it and he was like, the only thing I can do is like, we're going to have to make an alliance and it's not going to be a traditional alliance. I'm going to have to give myself to this organization and hopefully, and the funny thing is that it's like, he basically puts it out there to the Emperor, makes this a weird appeal to him, and it's like, well, that's the worst person to try to make an appeal to is the Emperor, because he just kind of like does whatever he wants, and it's like, if that, I don't know, it's that thing where it's like, I just expected a lot more, and I'm just kind of disappointed.
Yeah.
I just really thought I was going to get, like, I wanted Thrawn to make mistakes. And basically, he doesn't really make mistakes, as he just misjudges a few things, and then he kind of learns. And he's almost like, he gets in trouble because he's so good that he doesn't really have a capacity to understand why people resent him for it. That's his weakness. It's like, well, that's, I think most people have, what I mean, could be a little like blinded, but again, it's like, it's the whole thing where it's like people are rarely the villains of their own stories. It's just I'm not really like, he's alive in this continuum of this story now. I'm not that excited about hearing any more about it. I'll be fine with fine seeing what he's doing on Rebels. I don't need a sequel to this book. I don't need to, I don't need to check in. So
yeah, and Zahn has said that he's open to writing more Thrawn books, so maybe those are in the works. Maybe they're not. Maybe Lucasfilm was like, no, we're good. Maybe that was his kind of like public negotiation of like, hey, I can write more Thrawn books. Which, yeah, on the one hand, I'm like you, where it's, yeah, no, after this, great. Then we pick up with Rebels, and then that will continue his story, and that's fine with me. On the other hand, it's like, well, maybe if they wrote more books, we could learn more about this other stuff, and we could maybe get the story that we wanted from this book. But the odds of that happening, I think, are pretty low, because I think they're taking except with, the Aftermath books, and, there may be some other kind of big event trilogy or book that comes along, where we're like, oh, this is a book where you find out how X happens or why this thing is the way it is. I think they're gonna take more of a safer approach with the books and just try to not step on the toes of the movies, of the TV shows, that those are going to be kind of the primary vehicles that they're going to tell the stories with.
Yeah, and it makes me really think that, like, that's unless it's kind of pre-vetted, I'm already kind of off the books. I mean, I'm okay with the comics, and I have my issues with them, but I enjoy them obviously differently than the novels. But it's like, you have to, I audiobook, so I was doing my dishes and stuff, but it's still like, it was actually kind of a tough slog, because it's only like, it's like a 16-hour audiobook, and it's like, it took me like weeks to finish it, because I was just like, nothing about it was like, I can't put this down. And
the accents, I don't think,
and the accents
sounds like they didn't help.
They didn't help, and it's. I kind of just. I expected these books to be more of since they're doing less of them. Well, maybe they're not actually. Maybe they're doing more of them now that they do the young and I guess my point is that I would hope that these were bigger stories if they were going to bother to get Zahn to do it. And somebody actually, one of the criticisms I read about it, somebody called it a young adult novel. And
I think that's only true insofar as like there's not a lot of complicated language in it that would pose a barrier to a reader who's still developing their vocabulary. It's certainly not like a very dark, serious, heavy, weighty, capital N novel. But
I'm not looking for George Eliot here, but right. It's And I didn't have a problem with the writing. Writing's fine. It's just the idea that I felt like I didn't learn anything from him. He's the same Thrawn that I've known for 25 years, and I don't feel like I got a window into anything. But I'm done. I'm done talking about it.
All right. Well, so that's a good place to wrap up, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
For the week.
If you guys need to get a hold of us, send us an email, say, like, Robert, your Thrawn review sucks. Actually, don't do that. I don't need that.
But what did you think of Thrawn? Tell us what you thought of Thrawn.
Yeah, if you bothered to read it, give us an email, hosts, HOSTS, at talkingbirdcast.com. We're on Twitter, at talkingbirdcast. We have a website. It's www.talkingbirdcast.com. We have an Amazon affiliate link. And I think you know how those work. It's www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon. Did you have anything you needed to add?
No. Screaming Citadel number 1 comes out this week. When we return, we'll probably be talking about that. So if you want to read that, drop us a line. What did you think about Screaming Citadel? We'll talk about it on the show.
Screaming Citadel! Sorry. I'm still think it sounds like a concept album by Cinderella or something. Anyway, for Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
I remain John Llewellyn.
Thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.
George is very smart about movies. He knows how movies work.
Ford admits he isn't always smart about movies. Some of his choices have failed. A 1979 love story called Hanover Street, and last year's science fiction film, Blade Runner.
I've almost always done films with the best of intentions. Hoping that it would be successful, feeling that it would be successful, that the part that I'd play in it would work. And I blew it a couple times. I made wrong choices. Bound to, though. It doesn't really... it doesn't bother me as much as it used to.